Hi everyone, I'm Tanya Kuptanani Vatsa. I'm the founder and CEO of Elixir Wellness. And today I'm really excited to have a guest with so much experience and history with us. So before I introduce him, we're here for episode 16 of the Spillingfacts podcast. We're going to be talking all about sports recovery and performance with Shayamal Vallabhjee. He has a long track record of being literally everywhere, as we were just chatting. He works with Stanford, with the Indian football team, the Indian cricket team, and currently is based out of Barcelona. So we're really thrilled to have him here. And I'd love for him to tell you a little bit more about himself and, of course, his work in the field of sports science and sports psychology.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for welcoming me onto your podcast. Yes, as you've got it right, I started my career as a sports scientist. I was born in South Africa. I spent the better part of 2.5 decades at the forefront of elite sport. It's been a beautiful journey. South African and Indian cricket, South African Indian tennis, now the Indian football team, many franchises around the globe, including ISL and IPL and Caribbean Premier League. All of these things have been going. And now kind of straddle both, where I do a lot of work for corporate executives on mental health and well-being and putting systems and infrastructure in place. And I spend a lot of time working on things like mindset with my athletes, because I fundamentally believe that that's where the biggest shift is going to be. And it's been a beautiful journey.
Actually, really fascinating, because our next podcast is on mental health and mental wellness, because I feel like that's such an integral part when you're talking about wellness in general. And it's sort of a missing piece, particularly in India, where it's sort of now coming to the forefront and people are talking about therapy sporadically online, but it's still not an accepted part of everyday society.
Yeah, it's definitely not an accepted part. And the challenge that I'm trying to address in corporate India around mental health is that mental health is not a seasonal topic, and it's not an agenda you tick once a year. It is something that needs to be iterated year on year. And the problem is that, I find talent and leadership teams struggle to keep bringing that topic back in, because they feel we've done this last year, we've got to do something new. But we're not really understanding and titrating that education process to refit that audience. And that's the biggest struggle I'm having right now.
That's definitely interesting to know, because I feel like even as a team, it's something, and as a founder, that's something that I'm constantly sort of looking at and trying to keep a tab on. But it's not still well accepted here.
It's definitely not. And you need to peel away the layers of creating safe, emotional and psychological spaces, because people need to trust what is okay to say and what's not okay to say. I was talking at a event last weekend, and we were trying to speak about something called Safe Sport, which is an entire organization based out of the UK, where we're starting to double click on language, and understand what are the ramifications of certain words we use. And, having spent 2 decades in professional sport, one of the biggest learnings I've had is that there's a massive gap to bridge in understanding cultural nuance when you try to create a mental health ecosystem that's safe.
Okay. And with your experience, I'm sure this is a topic and a question that you get very often, but what does peak performance mean to you?
Peak performance is really and truly, raising the bar of your own potential. When peak performance is looking at all of the minute things that can optimize your well-being. It could be mental, it could be physical, it could be tactical and technical. What I do in the world of performance is we try to differentiate between high performance and elite performance. So high performance fundamentally means you're raising your own bar. So if your HRB moves, the trend line moves by 2 or 3 data points week on week or month on month, then you're a high performer. You're doing certain things to raise the bar. Elite performance means there's a threshold and you need to cross that threshold to succeed. So, for example, if a 100-meter sprinter wants to qualify for the Olympics, he would need to run close to about 10 or 10, 15 to qualify. Now, that is elite performance. That means the threshold, the bar has been set, and we do everything we can to cross that bar. And that's the distinguishing difference. And the reason why I kind of try to bring this clarity in is because you could be a high performer, but that doesn't necessarily mean you will, have cut it to succeed. It's a high performance is a very personal mindset journey. Elite performance is taking into account everything on the external environment that's required to succeed.
And from my understanding, I believe that when you're training at such high intensity, like as an elite performer, for example, that's something that can actually take away from your body.
Well, 100%. We say this very often, that longevity and performance are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Okay. What you're doing to operate at the best physiological and mental capacity you can doesn't necessarily promote well-being. Okay. In fact, there's a lot of detrimental effects to tissue when you're pushing your body at that extent. Longevity is sitting in a beautiful range and gently titrating when you're out of your comfort zone and when you're pushing your cells, because that stress is healthy for the cells. The level of stress that we expose tissue to is unsustainable at an elite performance level. So yes, it's very, very important for people to understand that. And I think when someone walks down this path, it's very clear for them to know what they're trying to do. And doctors and practitioners need to have that conversation.
Absolutely. Actually, I was watching the Australian Open and Djokovic retired a match, which was really shocking because he's someone who's constantly sort of trying to push the boundaries of his own physical capabilities. So when you're talking about this, that's exactly what came to mind. And I feel like at that level, or at the level of an elite athlete, how do you sort of manage the balance between well-being and longevity for an elite performer, for a peak performer, versus getting the best out of them?
So at an elite level, we spend 70% of our time recovery. Okay. So we're only pushing the body 30%. But that 70% allows us to maximize that 30%. So that's the biggest difference between anyone who's moving and looking at longevity as a science and doing everything outside that's not a professional athlete and professional athlete. So once you understand when and how to push the body, then and how to recover, then you can get maximum out of it. Most people don't achieve their maximum potential because they don't promote recovery. They feel recovery is a waste of time. We're not able to quantify and understand that and educate them enough. And this is the biggest difference. So with athletes, the journey is not difficult at all because they know it. Rest is an important part. Sleeping 9 hours is important. The massage is a daily part of it. Ice baths, infrared saunas, acupuncture, cupping, even the type of supplementation that we source for them is very, very high priority. And they understand that. They invest a significant amount in that well-being and recovery because they're able to see the tangible results of that in their performance.
And does mental wellness play a part in this as well, and mental well-being?
Absolutely. Because to develop not just athletes, to develop anyone, 70% of it is your environment. Okay. It's epigenetics. And 30% of it is your genetics. And we've seen multiple amounts of research that kind of come to the same conclusion. And why we are engineering mental well-being is we're creating a very, very protected environment for them where few people have access to them, when we have conversations, how we have conversations, who their training partners are, the type of water and food that they're consuming. We try to keep sacrosanct the environment around them to protect that mental health. And if it's not, we will see the impact of it on the court very, very quickly.
So do you as a sports psychotherapist have a kind of philosophy in mind to kind of create a winning mindset when it comes to working with these athletes?
Absolutely. My entire philosophy is subtract before you add. So I am trying to carve away as much as I possibly can. I'm trying to create mind space for my athletes. And sometimes I use the physical environment where I try to keep the physical environment as decluttered and clean as possible. And then hopefully we get that reciprocal effect in the mind. But when the calendar is packed, when there are too many people, clamming for your time, when you have a packed travel schedule, it's impossible for you to reflect on what you need to do. So one of the best parts for me around mental health and allowing them to focus, being mindful in execution, is to constantly declutter, subtract before you add. So before we try to add something new, we look at what is it that we can take away from the ecosystem. And there's a beautiful quote that says, perfection is not when there's nothing new to add, but when there's nothing left to remove. And that's really the core philosophy around peak performance that I kind of personally bring to every ecosystem that I'm working with.
That's amazing. That's great to know. And I think that's something that we can even kind of translate into the lives of everyday individuals, not just athletes?
Absolutely. Everyone should have this mindset about how do we carve space for ourselves. And healthy boundaries are how do I ask for that space? Whether it's couples at home, whether it's people in a work environment, whether it's athletes in a team. And I learned this because I spent, 4 years living in an ashram. And in that ashram, we used to eat one meal by ourselves, but you had to ask for that time. So they taught you very, very early, how do you set your boundaries and how do you communicate those boundaries? And then how do you use that time that you've carved out for yourself to be mindful, whether eating or to reflect or to journal or to chant. So we need to start to encourage this a lot more.
That's amazing. That's really fascinating to know. Actually, I'd love to hear more about that experience. So coming to athletes again, and I'm definitely going to get back to that topic. How do you cultivate resilience in your athletes when it comes to kind of mental toughness and getting them to push through the hard stuff?
The first thing we're trying to do with resilience, it's not so much about pushing through the hard stuff. It's about showing up every single day. So we have a philosophy in sport, which is we try to raise the floor instead of push the ceiling. So most people who would walk in here are trying to push the ceiling. They're trying to train harder. They're trying to look at what their maximum is and get that higher and higher and higher. When we train elite athletes, we're not doing that. We're looking at where the base level is, where's the floor, which is the bare minimum that we need to do. And those are non-negotiable. It could be Christmas, New Year's, any day that has to be done. So it could be the type of food you eat, the minimal amount of movement that you do, the type of supplements you take. These are non-negotiables that will happen every single day. And we look at how can we titrate and add that. Because when you start to raise the floor gets closer to the ceiling, and then it becomes easier to push the ceiling.
That's an amazing way to think about it.
Exactly. And most people make the mistake of trying to push the ceiling, but they don't do anything at the floor. So the gap is too big. Okay. And when the gap is too big, it becomes really mentally and physically exhausting to even reach that ceiling before you can break through that threshold. So every single thing is about mindset. It's about understanding, what is going to be my mental approach to the way I live my life. And when we start to titrate it back to these simple things here, it makes it easier to make very, very important decisions.
And how do you sort of assess when you're talking about this, an athlete's readiness to sort of start working in that direction?
So we measure readiness and the ability to compete in 4 different categories. So we look at physical, and physical is non-negotiable. So what is your body fat, your speed, your power, your acceleration, your VO2 max, all of that. We don't really look too much at HRV because HRV is too responsive a data point. So that can change minute to minute. But things like VO2 max, things like resting heart rate, sleep quality, deep sleep percentages, these are more sacrosanct data that we look at. On the basis of that, we decide how hard to push them in training and competition. So pillar 1 is technical. We're looking at technical is your competency to execute a skill. So how well can you execute a skill? And if I keep dialing up the pressure, how well you do it? Because in sport, the gap we're trying to close is the gap between strategy and execution. So for example, you could take a young bowler and you say, hey, listen, in practice, I want you to bowl a Yorker, and he runs up and he does that. Now, the question is, can he execute the same skill if he's bowling the last over in the final of the IPL? Right. Then that is when you dial up the pressure and you look at the execution ability. That comes into technique. So we look at technique as the second. The third is tactical. Tactical is what is the strategy that you kind of implementing to execute any particular thing, right? How do we think about that? Now, strategy will come in based on competence and will based on the availability of knowledge. So we are constantly encouraging them to expose themselves to different ways of thinking. And the last is mental strength, emotional resilience, mental toughness. And we develop this by making sure there's certain things that we can repeat every single day. That repeating that same thing every day builds a certain type of muscle memory. And then more important than that is I double click on the self-talk in the mind. So every time something goes wrong, whether it's a practice, whether it's a conversation, whether it's a newspaper article, I'm revisiting the narrative in the mind.
Okay.
Because the most successful people on the planet are not the people who are the most technically competent. They're the people who have the most self-compassion and kindness in the narrative that they repeat in their mind. Because that ensures you come back to the drawing board. If you come back to the drawing board and keep repeating, success is inevitable. So these are the 4 quadrants that we work at and how we analyze them.
I actually want to dwell on the 4th point a little bit because so I recently started playing tennis. I've never played a sport in my entire life. The last 4 months I've been at it. I think I've done some 54 or 55 turns in like 3.5, 4 months. And I'm addicted. And one of the things I read in the last week was about how your mental narrative to yourself, people are more positive when they lose a point and think that, okay, I'm going to get the next one. Actually have a lower heart rate, resting heart rate while they're playing. They're doing better. They're more competent. They end up playing better than someone who is kind of abusing themselves when they miss a spot. And I asked my coach this. I said, I read this article. What do you think about it? And he said, I feel it's different motivation for different people. Like some people kind of get driven by the fact that they feel like they could have done better and by putting themselves down. But that's something personally that I don't know if I agree with. I'd love to have your opinion on.
This is an interesting thing, and we get these answers from many coaches who are technically competent but don't really understand how the mind works. Okay. The first question is, yes, you're right. Maybe everyone gets motivated differently by different types of narratives. The question I ask the coach is, what are you doing to understand who is sitting in front of you? Is the first question we should understand. How do I know whether it's the stick or carrot that motivates you? The second thing is, there's a phenomenal body of evidence to prove to us that if the narrative is light, it's energizing, and it's positive, the person will bounce back from that far greater. Okay. We know this. The question is, how do we keep doubling down on that? Because in elite sport, you will only succeed 30% of the time. This is at the highest level. At the level me and you are competing, success is even way less than that. If you look at the number of points, the number of matches, the number of games we've won. So if you're failing 80% to 85% of the time, right, then the narrative that you repeat in your mind will determine what happens not just in the next game, but in the very, very next point. Okay. And there's an art and a science to resetting and reframing that all the time. We know for a fact that if the mind dwells on anything besides the current, it's a distraction. Okay. So in sports psychology, we must know that the positive is as detrimental as the negative. So you could be extremely confident as a person, and that could distract you from performance, or you could be extremely fearful, and that will distract you as well. Okay. The person who's overconfident may hit the ball longer, and the person who's fearful may hit it in the net. Okay. Both of those will lose you the point, but both are the result of the mind not being present.
Okay.
So there are various ways to sort of deep dive, double click on it. These are very sort of complex subjects, but we can keep going.
Are there any misconceptions, or rather, what are the biggest misconceptions that you see when it comes to peak performance in mental wellness and readiness?
The biggest misconception or myth is that everyone seems to think they know what to say to themselves. They understand compassion, they understand kindness, they understand the impact of positive thoughts or how to stop automatic negative thoughts. They understand everything cognitively. The biggest misconception is that they think they'll be able to do it at the moment when they need it. And when the stress is there and when you need something, you will default to what you've practiced. Okay. You will default to what is routine and what is habit. So what people tend to overestimate is their ability to apply an intervention when there's a problem. Okay. And what they underestimate is the importance and the power of regular routine and regular practice. If you can start to correct this here, a lot of people will be in a better space.
That makes a lot of sense. So I want to touch a little bit on an approach, or rather a balanced approach to training, lifestyle, recovery. How do you achieve?
I published an entire book on balance.
Oh, wow. Okay.
and balance is quite an interesting thing. The reason I published this book and wrote it, because when I started doing research more than a decade ago on the subject of balance, it's something everyone's looking for. It's something no one has found. So how can the whole world be looking for something and no one find it? So I started to deep dive and double click on the word balance. And I started to look at things outside of the human species, because everything else operates on instinct. We operate on cognition. We're the first species. We are like an experiment. We're the first species that have intellect and are able to project our intellect 2-3 decades down the future. No one else can do that. So I looked at balance in every other ecosystem, and I noticed something interesting. I noticed that balance is not symmetrical anywhere else. Only humans seem to think balance is symmetrical. So when I ask you, to balance something, you will apply Newton's third law, equal and opposite, and you try to get it. But that's not balance. Balance is anything that brings something into equilibrium. So, for example, if I give you a biological example, if you eat a donut that has, or a can of Coke that has 30 grams of sugar in it, your body will not produce 30 grams of insulin to balance your sugar. It'll produce 1/100th of that if, to bring it. So there's an imbalance that brings about equilibrium. So when you're trying to find balance in your life, the first thing you shouldn't do is look for balance in terms of time and equality in everything. So because you sleep for 8 hours or because you work for 12 hours doesn't mean you need to do 12 hours somewhere else. There could be an imbalance around that's maintaining yourself in a state of balance. The second thing is balance is ever evolving and ever flowing. So the state of balance you're in today could be very different from the state of balance you're going to be in the next 15 minutes, right? Because there's so many things that predict and determine that, okay? And we need to be able to ebb and flow with that, If you bring a static mindset to it, it will be very, very difficult for us to do. And I think the last most important aspect of balance is that if you look at anything that's balancing, whether it's this camera stand or something, you'll notice that every single thing has a central point around where everything is resting. Everything in the world will have a central stabilizing point. Okay. And then things move on either side of that. What's critically important, and I break things down into 4 quadrants. I said the mind, the body, your relationships, and your environment. Okay. These are 4 quadrants. Okay. You need to understand where you're most comfortable, which is your most stabilizing place. For some people, it could be the relationships. For some people, like my athletes, it's their body. For the monks that I lived in the temple, it was their mind and their meditation practice. Some people, it's an environment. I like to just go to the beach, or I like to be in the mountains and stuff. Once you understand that, you must know that that has to be a core part of your makeup on a weekly or monthly basis, because you can stress yourself, but if you don't return to this, you will burn out. So balance is about how you push yourself and how you return to this area that is nourishing and rejuvenating and stabilizing for you. If you can figure out this formula, right, and build your entire world around returning to that space, you'll be able to take on anything and you will succeed.
I'm actually introspecting as well while I'm listening to you, because when you said that, I'm wondering what mine is. And I actually feel like the days that I'm most relaxed, more than a vacation, more than a beach, it's when I'm actually at home. And just like, I need 2 hours on Sunday when I'm left alone to myself. And it's actually like we were talking about recovery stats and HRV. It's the day that outside of any recovery tools being used, when I'm the most recovered the next day, because I've had those couple of hours. And even if I do like a crazy workout in the morning and hit an 18 strain, but I've had that 2 hours in the evening to do nothing, I'm the most mentally on point on Monday.
So even 2 hours is too much. You'll find that if your home is your stabilizing place that rejuvenates you, if you've got, let's say, 2 different events to attend, one could be in the suburbs of Mumbai, and you hypothetically live here, and you have another one that's also in that area. You coming back home for even 15 minutes, right, to just have a cup of tea or wash your face will drastically change your energy output at the second event, as opposed to if you directly go to that one, because the beautiful thing about this space that you recognize, it's time doesn't matter, just a touch point with that there will completely neurobiologically reset your body and your mind, So you're 100% right, just walking in. Yeah.
So I have literally, I try to keep nothing on Sunday. This Sunday, I have 4 things. There are 2 weddings. Both of my kids have a different sports tournament. And it's stressing me out since 2 days that I will not get that time on Sunday. And I'm someone who's like, okay, I'll just go from one to the other, power through and try to get home after so that I have more time at home. But this makes sense to sort of break it up. And
if you break it up and come back home, you'll show up in a much better way. Okay. So there's 2 ways you can go about it. You can have them as a checklist that I need to tick these boxes, or you can be mindfully present in each interaction because you've committed to be there. Now, if you've committed to be there and you want to be mindfully present, then you need to titrate your day to make sure that you do things that allow you to be mentally present. Otherwise, by the end of the day, you're going to be really drained and exhausted. And the problem is
I'm drained thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's how balance is. And the more we look and more we think and engineer things like this, you'll find that everyone can bring it into balance and everyone can show up in a beautiful way.
No, that's fascinating and something that I feel I'm going to apply to my life immediately. I do it here 2 days that I have to go for tennis. I'll sort of prolong that couple of hours and work a little longer because I'm like, who's going to go home and get out again? But that's great to sort of know. So I want to come back to what you said about raising the floor and the non-negotiables so that the floor is closer to the ceiling. I really love that analogy. And I feel one of the things you said was part of the floor is nutrition. So let's talk a little bit about nutrition. What are the must-dos that your athletes have and how can we sort of translate that for everybody else?
So for my athletes, everything is evidence-based, even for my corporate clients. So I would run them through a set of genomic tests. I'll understand their DNA. So that informs me about what your body's ability to metabolize certain foods are. We must realize and understand that you're not a byproduct of what you eat. You're a byproduct of what your body can digest, right? So because you eat kale doesn't mean you're getting the nutrition from it. You can be further benefited by eating something that's probably not as powerful as kale, but your body has a better ability to absorb its nutrition from. So understanding that. Now, because everything in our body and how we show up comes in through the gut-brain axis is the most important. So if you double click on nutrition, we'll do a genetics test, for example, to understand what our body can metabolize. Then we'll do a food intolerance and a metal intolerance test to understand, okay, what are the things that are triggering inflammation? If you want to really be healthy, you have to eliminate everything that can trigger inflammation in your body. Get it out from foods and get it out from metals. Then you're giving your body a chance to kind of just rest, biologically and physiologically, just feel a state of comfort. Now, once it feels a state of comfort, you can achieve higher levels of peak performance.
Okay.
If there's cortisol and stress in the body that's triggered from anything, it'll be very difficult for you to sort of show up. So the few things that I try to do is eliminate everything that we are intolerant to, even mild intolerances. Because if you have a gluten intolerance, people will tell me, oh, we switched to sourdough bread. It doesn't matter. If there's any amount of gluten, it can trigger an inflammatory response, And you'll see this, like with a lot of procedures that happen in the clinic, for example, with skin that use infrared or use heat, right? Once the skin becomes sensitive, even if you drop the intensity, it still triggers the same response. Why? Because you've triggered a sensitivity, Like when I work with certain clinics, I'm telling them, we should flip it. Instead of starting at high intensity and coming low, you should start low and go high, because by the time you get to the end, they would have exposed themselves to more heat than the other way around. Just a simple philosophy. So when it comes to nutrition, for example, understand what your body will respond to and clean it up. The second is go as natural as possible. So I work on trying to optimize the body around the 5 elements. And it's not just nutrition, it's everything. So the 5 elements are fire, water, air, space, and earth. So fire is your vitamin D, sun exposure. If you can't be in the sun, I encourage taking fruits and vegetables, leaving them out in the sun, let them absorb that vitamin D. The second is water. Water is consuming water-rich foods, so foods that release water. The third is earth. Earth is eating whole plant-based foods. The fourth is space. Space is fasting. I'm a massive advocate of creating and giving the digestive system a lot of space to sort of recover, to heal, to all of that. Each person has a different formula around their intermittent fasting. Whatever you do, It's entirely yours, but fasting is very, very good. And the fourth is air, which is your breath work. And I fundamentally believe that breath work can set your entire biological responses correctly. Most people operate within a certain range of breath. I encourage people to do a maximum inhalation and a maximum exhalation 5 times in the morning, 5 times in the evening. Once you hit the upper apex of both, then, your body has a completely different physiological response to us just breathing normally in the whole day. This is how I look at well-being and wellness, and I start to feed everything in to these 5 elements.
That's really interesting. And Actually, breathwork has been coming up a lot, and I feel like there's so many different ways to do it, including like deep sighs to sort of reset your parasympathetic nervous system.
Correct.
But this is I haven't heard this before, like to inhale and exhale to your maximum capacity.
Yeah, most people don't teach it. And the reason they don't teach it is because I'm not giving you a breathwork practice. I'm giving you the science of breath and how it physiologically works in our body. So we understand that at different capacities, we will trigger different responses, both in alignment with the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So for example, if you have shallow inhalations, you will trigger the sympathetic nervous system that goes in. If you have rapid exhalations or long, slow exhalations, you'll trigger the parasympathetic vagal system. But there's also other triggering mechanisms that happen right at the maximum of your inhalation and maximum of your exhalation. We don't ever use those, So what we're saying is start to bring the entire library of breathwork interventions in, because they all have beautiful and powerful responses.
That's really interesting. And where do sleep and stress fall into this?
So stress gets a bad name for a lot of things. Stress is good. Our body grows and our body responds to stress. The problem is if the stress is not graduated and it's not consistent, then your body won't know how to adapt to stress. So for example, if you're a runner who doesn't run every week but decides to try to run a marathon, you will get injured. If you don't weightlift a lot and you try to throw something or lift something, you will. That's because it's not because of the presence of stress. It's because the gap between the floor and the ceiling was so big, right? So stress gets a bad name for everything. But the truth is that we got to try to understand what is the stress point that we need to operate at, and what are the ways in which we can stress our body and our mind to get us close to that. So our response mechanisms are a lot closer and we can understand them a lot better. Now, sleep is very, very interesting. Sleep is the number one recovery tool in anyone's arsenal. Okay, we understand very, very well that we get probably our deepest and most rejuvenative sleep in the first 3 sleep cycles. Okay, so those 4.5 hours are sacrosanct. We also understand that once we go into cycle 4, cycle 5 is where most people's sleep breaks. Okay, so you would inevitably wake up between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. depending on what time you go. That's the transition between cycle 3 and cycle 4. So we understand all of this. What people need to be more mindful of is, what are the things that allow me to get better sleep, and the ways you can look at it around your environment. So, for example, I'm a big proponent of using down lighting in the evening to down regulate the nervous system. So you can use scents if you want to bring that. Having a really warm shower just before you sleep uses thermoregulation, calms the body down. Blackout blinds, sound filters, all of these things will help promote it. And sleep science is very, very deep and very complex. And once you start to go into it, you'll unravel a few things. And it can be simple interventions that completely change the quality of your lives. We have to be mindful of that. But if I have to say one thing, the last thing around it is that from everyone that I work with, especially in the corporate world, I find we all academically and cognitively understand everything. We have not understood how to physiologically feel what we academically know. So if I ask you, how do you meditate? You will have a great description of what to do, right? When you do that, are you able to feel what you're telling me I should feel? There's a big gap between that. And that's what we need to close. The gap of teaching people how to feel what they're able to cognitively describe.
Really, really interesting. My mind is also sort of trying to relate to how to kind of take this out and make sure that it's practices that we can all follow, not just at the elite level. So actually, walk me through the process. If an elite level athlete comes to you, or an individual or a corporate comes to you, and they want a tailor-made, personalized plan to make sure that they're functioning at their most optimum, what all would you look at? How would you do?
So I do a whole bunch of things. The first is I'll run them through a whole bunch of assessments. I'm looking at blood pathology. I'm looking at, I'll get the wearable tracker on them. Then I'll also get a genetics test, the intolerances. Let's assume all the physiological markers are taken care of. Then my big advantage comes in with I take a whole bunch of psychometric assessments so that I know how to talk to you and I know how your brain processes information. Now I start to feed my interventions in through the way your brain can process and understand that information. So some people are creative in big picture. So I give them the big picture of what we try to do. Some people are granular and micro and very logical and methodological. So I need to explain to them the research, the steps of everything. Then the next thing I do is I tap into your entire ecosystem. So when I'm working with you, I want to meet your partner. I want to know the details of your executive assistant. I want to see who's engineering a plan. If you have a cook or a trainer, I will be connected with them, because I don't give you all the information. It makes no difference to you. I'd rather give it to the people in your ecosystem who are implementing it, and I work with them. So my entire process of working with someone is very, very holistic.
Yeah.
And I only work once there's an ecosystem in place where we can tap in. Because physically, if you're an individual only trying to do everything yourself, it's going to be very, very difficult for you, and you don't have the mental space to absorb everything and implement everything. So I try to build that ecosystem and bring in evidence-based research around it. And I fundamentally believe that a rising tide lifts all ships. So when I'm working with your trainers and your nutritionists, I'm also trying to give them information, empower them. If I can get certifications that they can go through, I want everyone in your ecosystem to get better, not just you to get healthier.
That's amazing. And I feel like one of the things that stop people, I know it stopped me in the past from getting the right nutrition program in place, for example, is as someone who doesn't cook, I'm like, okay, you're giving me the recipes, but who's going to translate this and teach my cook how to do this?
Yeah, exactly.
So I feel like your approach is really unique, because that's not something I've heard anyone say, is where they're working with the entire team and the ecosystem.
You have to. I'll go sit in my client. I'll go, sometimes I go with the people who are shopping to the market, show them what the difference is. I'll look at it. I'll look at the kitchen. I'll say, okay, these are the oils. We'll change these oils. I'll look at the spices. I'll say, what are they? Because every single thing makes a difference. See, I come from sports science. Sports science is a science of incremental gains, So I need to look at every single thing. And that's where we're going to make the massive difference. And I don't expect you to go in and do that. It's not your job. But once I go in and put it in place, then you never have to worry about it again. So that's what we're trying to do.
And this is what you would do it for everyone, not just your elite level athletes.
Yes, for everyone.
So in your practice, do recovery practices sort of help from a preventive health perspective as well?
Yeah, 100%. Like from a preventive point of view, I'm trying to get people to, it could be everything from the type of clothes you wear to the time you travel to the food you eat, infrared saunas, compression cuffs, you name it. We try to bring everything in. I'm also very cognizant of how much of a person wants to spend on this journey. I try to start really at the ground-based level and then raise it slowly. I don't go in with big, expensive interventions. As we were talking before the podcast, I said, the longevity science, in my opinion, promotes a lot of social inequality.
Yes.
It's something that's catering only to the upper niche community areas, and I'm not a big fan of that. I feel that, if you look at things that have increased our lifespan and health span significantly, all of those things are not the price of compression cuffs. They're not the price of IV drips. Those are they accessible to every single person because they've been medical advancements. Yes. So I'm a big fan of telling people, okay, you know what? If you can do it, do it. Yeah. But the greatest improvements have been in medical advancements, not in longevity science. So whilst people are going on this practice of longevity and trying to do this, I tell them, do me a favor and try to incorporate your entire household into it. Okay. So for example, just last night I was sitting with one client at their home and I said, let's change the environment a little bit. In the evenings, when you get home, let's use a little bit more downlighting. And then I said, the one thing I'd like to do is, I said, everyone seems to be a little bit anxious. End of the day, there's lots of kids, right? I said, we're going to start to play, a little bit of chants or a little bit of mantras, a little bit of music, because music will talk to the subconscious system very differently, right? So you got downlighting and music that's going to completely, stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, stimulate the vagal nervous system, and everyone's going to be a lot calmer in the house, right? And I said that when we start to do anything and we start to create an intervention in the ecosystem, it's not just you going to benefit. All of your staff are going to benefit. Everyone's going to benefit, because the thing is that you don't operate as an individual. You operate as a byproduct of your ecosystem. So when you're trying to bring longevity science in, if you think of everything ecosystemally, then what happens is you benefit a lot more.
And I feel like as a parent, it's the kids also who pick up on the little things. Like my eating has changed in the last 6 months. So they're also doing complex carbs. In fact, this month, both my kids and the 8 and 11, they're doing a 30-day sugar challenge.
Nice.
And I personally can't do it. I'm like, I will have my one sweet thing on Sunday. I avoid it the rest of the week. But it's amazing to see them to the point where they're like, Nani, don't give me prasad. It's got sugar in it. Or then Nimbu Pani has, what is it in? And my son's asking in the kitchen, he's like, did you put monk fruit? Did you put honey? Did you put sugar? Because I can only have one of the three. So it's really interesting to see how everyone comes into play.
I mean, this is fundamentally brilliant because, children don't listen to what you say. They learn from what you do. That's the fundamental thing. And one of the biggest things that I'm trying to bring into a lot of my clients is how do we engineer an environment that is psychologically and emotionally safe for children so that they can learn. And I said, a child, we have a 6-year-old at home. So, I spend a lot of time. One of the key areas in my clinical practice is also child trauma and child psychology. So I understand the importance of a really safe space. Okay. But I also understand that there's so much of stimuli that they're facing from different people who we have no idea who they are. And they're very, very subtle, in this way that anything can trigger trauma, anything can trigger a response, and they may not necessarily feel comfortable saying things. So, when you bring the whole household in, then you bring everyone into this beautiful mindful practice, and the children are the ones who benefit the most very, very quickly.
Okay.
And there's certain things that are very interesting. For example, we know that a child that swims from the time they're born up to about 11 years old will have a significantly larger VO2 max and lung capacity than a child who starts at 11 and swims till they're 80. So we know the response of certain things on the body, especially in the foundational years. So very, very important.
So movement is something that I want to talk about because that's an affordable recovery tool for all. Movement, mobility, flexibility.
Right.
Where do these play in and how do these come in at all levels?
So movement is essential. I think one of the most powerful piece of research that was done was a group looked at every organism that has a brain. Okay. And they found one thing common. So besides humans, they found every single organism that has a brain moves. And they found one particular species of a type of a amoeba that lives in the ocean. It's born with a brain and it floats. And within 2 weeks, it attaches itself to a rock. And the first organ that dissolves itself is the brain. So what we really understand is that movement is fundamentally critical to the health of your brain. So we talk a lot about the gut-brain axis. The axis that we don't talk a lot about is the foot-gut axis. Okay. The relationship between how healthy your gut is with how much you move. And it's not just movement, it's also about connecting to the earth. So I tell people, wearing shoes all the time is not great. I said, get the shoes out, walk barefoot, connect to the earth, ground yourself, because we had this stimulation under the foot that really triggers healing completely throughout. And very, very important for it to do it. I mean, I cannot overstate the importance of movement. And when we talk, just now we spoke of nutrition, people ask me, should we start moving or should we change our diet first? And I said, in my experience, the person who starts moving first is more conscious of what they eat.
Absolutely.
The person who just tries to change the diet will give up or will cheat. But the person who moves, right, is very, very conscious of what they eat. So I generally encourage people, move, and everything else will fall in place.
I actually feel like on a day so I try not to miss my workout at all. Like yesterday, I had a really bad neck spasm. It's still sort of going on. So I was advised not to lift anything. And I was like, but I can't not spend that hour in the gym. So I said, okay, I've done my 2 days of tennis, but I'm getting on the treadmill and just finishing my steps on the treadmill as opposed to doing it around the house, because at least it's a little bit more intense. So zone 2 training and I'm hitting those metrics. But what I feel is that I wore a CGM for a bit. So I know that if I eat after my meal, my sugar is dropping a lot faster and a lot quicker than it would otherwise. But on a day that I haven't worked out, I'm craving more sugar as well.
Yeah, you will crave more sugar, but there's an interesting science that says what you eat in the first 120 minutes from the time you wake up, you will crave more of it. So you'll notice that if someone has a coffee in the first 2 hours, they will drink 4 coffees in the day. If you don't have any coffee in the first 2 hours, you could literally go the whole day without needing it. If you have a carb-rich breakfast, you will trigger the response for carbs consistently. If you have a very heavy protein, you will trigger it. And for those who do intermittent fasting, you'll find that if you eat breakfast, by 2 hours later, you're hungry again. But if you fast, you'll find you can get right to the afternoon without needing anything. That's because the neurobiological response to what you put in the body in the first 120 minutes triggers the cadence that you'd require that after that. So very, very important to really and truly understand that there.
And so for me, it's always protein in the morning. But is there a recommendation in terms of, should it be fiber, should it be protein? Of course, I don't think carbs would be the answer. Yeah, but what would you recommend?
I mean, protein fiber is probably the best combination that you could get in, and try to get as rich a supply of protein as you can. For the longest time, when we advocated for protein, there's a fundamental system that says we don't get enough protein for our regenerative health. We used to propagate 0.8 grams per kilogram, but it should be closer to 0.8 grams per pound of lean muscle. Okay. Then you're getting...
So that's almost double.
It's almost double, yeah. So most of us are not even getting anywhere close to 0.8 per kilogram. So that's how far we are below what we need. And that's why we're getting so much of these hormonal imbalances and everything coming in.
Are there any aspects of health and wellness in this space that you feel are particularly overlooked?
I think we're touching now on every single thing. Do we fully understand the science of each thing? The answer is no. I think we'll slowly start to double click on it. I think with respect to health and wellness, what's coming in, like yesterday, I was just looking at a product that's starting to come out where I can go into any supermarket and I'll be able to test the quality and the number of pesticides in any fruit, which is brilliant. Like, these were the things that were completely overlooked. We understand the importance of ecological and organic, but there's no way for us to validate or verify that. So these are the things that are moving as opposed to the bigger aspects of it.
Okay. No, and I also feel like in terms of technology and advancements, something like pesticide check would be great. Microplastics is another one that I feel has been overlooked. Now we're sort of talking about it, but I don't think people really understand how to get that out.
Yeah, 100%. How do we fully understand how to detoxify the body is something we're not double clicking on. Where I feel I would love to see more, we spoke earlier on about hyperbarics, but I feel there's not enough technologies around respiratory science teaching people how to improve their respiratory rates, because your respiratory rate and the quality of your breathing is directly proportional to the health of your mitochondria, which is everything. It's the engine of your cell. So if we can double click on that a little bit more, it'll be interesting. But I think we're moving at a very, very rapid pace. Like I always say, I feel that those who are coming from privileged backgrounds are racing and a lot of people else are forgotten, So that is where we can start to close the gap. We can start to bring more people along this journey.
And what is your perspective or your opinion on recovery tools like cryotherapy, hyperbaric that you just mentioned, the infrared sauna we touched on briefly earlier? What is your perspective on these? Are you using them for your athletes? Where do they come in for everything?
So we try our best. We use as much as we can. The myth is that we use everything. The answer is no, we don't. I can tell you that my corporate people who are focused on longevity are more pedantic about these things than my athletes are, And the reason why the athletes don't even worry half the time is because we live a clean life. We are managing our stress. We're moving a lot. We're sleeping well. We're eating well. So, those are the big things. So for everyone, yes, I do use all of these as well. But I tell people, it doesn't make sense to go and sit in the infrared sauna and drink a Coke after, So, understand what, like someone is like, I said, you can go and buy EMF underwear, or you can just try to do something simple to make sure that you switch your Wi-Fi off and you don't have any EMF in your room, So I said, start with the simple things first, right? And start to automate and habituate those things before we try to go and spend significant amounts of money on this and understand. We're also getting a trend of data overload. So you and I both use the Whoop.
Yeah.
I have a lot of clients who within 8 months of putting any of this technology on, throw it away.
Really?
Because yes, they don't look at the app, they stop looking at the app, the data doesn't matter, and it's triggering off anxiety. It's like every day, oh, my heart rate's this, my HRV's this is it. They're starting to be overly conscious of every decision, and it's impacting social and mental health. So they've literally thrown the device away.
Okay.
So the only people I see who maintain it are people who are either in the business of longevity or are athletes that are constantly wear it, but even they don't check the data.
Okay.
My corporate people are not using any of this.
Okay.
They're really experimenting, looking at it, and then throwing it away.
Actually, I have a lot of friends who say, we don't want to be on any groups, we don't want to be discussing it. I don't think they check it as religiously.
They don't.
For me, my morning used to be, I check my messages and stuff. Now I'll check my recovery score and then I'll plan my workout and my day accordingly, but not to the point where it's inhibiting. And I feel like, yes, if I was at a point where I felt like my decisions are all based on that, it would be something that I took off.
But this is an interesting conversation. You check it every day, but why do you check it every day? When you wake up, you already know what you've done in the last 24 hours. You know if you slept well. You know what's coming up in the day. What is changing by you looking at that score?
So I personally love to sort of see how the things I've done the day before, if I've changed anything, have impacted the way I've slept at night. Something I realized after wearing the Whoop was that a late meal for me is the biggest inhibitor of a good recovery.
Okay.
So there are learnings that I get from it that I feel like, okay, I'm more conscious about incorporating the next day. And for me, that's a big thing. Like, I'm like, okay, I used the sauna yesterday. How did that sort of affect me?
But we would already have enough data around this. Okay. So you already have the data on the use of alcohol, the use of late meals, the use of sauna. You already have things on when you're going to an event. You have enough data. What we need to double click on is trusting how you feel in the morning, and not using the data to validate how you feel.
Okay.
Because there's disparity between the two. And you don't want one thing to inform the other. You actually want your feeling to sort of be validated by the data, but not necessarily. So, this is what's happening, and this is what I'm trying to encourage people to start to do more, is connect more to the body, connect more to the limbic system, as opposed to being so cognitive and using and double clicking only on data.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm someone who at some point had the CGM, I wear the ring, I wear the Whoop, and now I'm like, okay, I'm being more mindful about when I check it because I'm trying to get off my screen time.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to reduce that, but I also love that, like, I have my different strength training programs plugged in.
Yeah.
So when I'm in the gym, I will hit that and put that on and then follow, and I'll check what weights I used the last time and stuff. So all that.
Yeah, this is good. If you got like training programs are great. You have to look at it. You have to check your weights. CGMs is an interesting one. Every time I give a CGM to a client, they think it's like a computer game and they have to keep it between the two bars of, it could be 70, 120. I said, that's not the purpose of it. The purpose is anything that you like eating, use it. And let's start to get data on how your body responds to it. The goal is not to have the best 2 weeks of your life and then go straight after that into something else. So where I find people, like the whole longevity science, we had a sudden spike when Brian Johnson came to India. And a few days later, I happened to be at the Bryan Adams concert. And I said, you know what? Jokingly, I said, we've interviewed the wrong Brian on longevity. Bryan Adams at 66 years old is partying, he's drinking, he's on stage, back-to-back concerts, doing 5 shows in 7 days, doing all of these things. He's not spending $1 million on his health, and he's not locking himself in the room. And his life is closer to our reality, So, we need to be cognizant of what we need and how we're going to find that balance. But also, we should understand, what does longevity mean for me? A lot of people are like, do I want to just live longer? Or do I want to be able to, someone told me interestingly, I want to play with my kids when I'm 70 years old. And I said, great. Are you playing with your kids now? If you're not
My son actually said this. I was watching, so when Brian Johnson came here, I was supposed to go to Soho House to hear him. And a little bit before, it was my Sunday evening sort of special listing. And a little bit before, I was like, I've not had any time with the kids this week. I just want to be home. And so I gave a friend the ticket. I think you know Tanveer.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, you go. And he was like, this is my role model. How can you not want to do this? And I was like, right now, like in this moment, you can give me the highlights, and I watch enough of him online to know what he's talking about. But I just need to be with my kids.
Yeah.
So he went, he enjoyed it. He gave me like the touch points after we chatted this thing. But I was like, I feel so much better because I got my Sunday 2 hours at home with the kids. And I was watching Don't Die when it came out with my son, because I had told them that, I'm supposed to go to Soho House. I don't feel like going to Juhu on the weekend. Now I'd rather be with you guys. And so my son, who's 11, like he's not even 11, he turns and tells me, Mama, this guy wants to live forever, but he's not living now.
Exactly. That's the point, isn't it?
It was like, I mean, literally, like his lifestyle is so regimented. And so I was like, look, for me, longevity is basically about quality of life in the years that you're living. You want to be able to. I have an uncle who just flew down from the US alone. He's 93 years old. We went to Alibag. He got on the boat himself, got off unassisted. Every evening he goes for a walk. Every night he has his 2 whiskeys measured with his 2 large whiskeys. And he was like, that works for me. This is my secret of sort of being...
Perfect. I recently, in December last year, I lost one of my friends who was the founder of Epigamium. And there's a lot of stress around that. He was a very, very dear friend of mine, and we're co-founders in a business. And I always tell people, I said, I'm in the science of longevity. I'm in the science of well-being. But I can tell you that Rohan lived more in 42 years than most people I know who are 90, because he was present. He was traveling. He supported. He was a champion for everyone's things. He celebrated wins. And I asked people, I said, you could do a lot to make sure you live to 80, right? But will you enjoy that time? And are you being fully present right now for the people that matter? Is the question. So, I generally encourage people, let's, disconnect. Just take a step back from everything. We don't, the science of performance is not about connecting. The science of performance is about disconnecting. It's about connecting more to yourself, not connecting to everyone outside and connecting to this. So if we can start to encourage more of this here, the truth is you wouldn't need so much of data, like literally, yesterday I did a blood test, and every 6 months I run a comprehensive test on everything. And before I do most blood tests, before I even get it, I will journal that morning and I will tell them, these are the things that I think could be either elevated or decreased, above and below the range. And more often than not, I'm 100% spot on. Because why? I've lived my life and I know what I've done. And I know the impact of what I've done, right? That data is just going to inform something, but I'm already aware of it. So then as I start to do it, I'm saying, okay, you know what? I'm starting to connect that level of consciousness to certain decisions that I'm doing, and the data is just informing it.
So actually, I knew Rohan's parents, know them and knew him as well. Met him briefly, but his parents are art collectors,
Correct,
so we know them through the art world. And I lost my best friend a few days before him. Very, very similar story. Post-workout and literally the fittest person he still holds the under 12 Maharashtra record for the fastest runners. 20-something years he's held that. And I think one of the reflections, so my last couple of months have been very introspective post this. And one of the reflections I've had is about how important it is to connect with yourself, yes, to make sure that your life doesn't have as much dysfunction. So fixing your relationship sort of around you and being in the moment and enjoying the people that you love and the people that are around you.
Absolutely. That's what I keep saying, I tell people, be there for the ones that matter. Celebrate time with them. Celebrate wins. I said, I walk around right now and I tell everyone to celebrate every single win, big or small, because most of us are so hard on ourselves. We don't know how to pause to celebrate these wins. And I would rather like to see bigger leaps and strides in that. It's amazing how we have technology for everything. We don't have a technology to remind us to smile.
It's true.
We don't have any tech for that. Have you ever seen? There's nothing.
Nothing.
Exactly.
Your Apple Watch will buzz to tell you to walk if it's
They tell you to walk, they tell you to move, they tell you to do this, everything. But it's not like we don't have a massive body of research on the power of positive psychology. There's probably more written on that than anything else. We even understand all of this, but we've not built technology for that. So it's amazing that we've built technology that triggers anxiety and fear, because the lack of a data point not being there will trigger those responses. We're not building technology to trigger certain positive emotions, because that could drastically change the way we look at everything. So I am very, very conscious of everything, and I try to bring this level of consciousness to everything. And I always encourage people, take a step back. Just take a step back.
That's amazing. It's actually a beautiful note to end on, but I have one last question. And that's for someone starting out their wellness journey. How do you recommend this?
Someone starting out, I would recommend them sleep well and move. These are the two biggest things. And then take a piece of paper, write down the names of family and then your 5 or 6 people in your life who truly, truly mean a lot. And then go the extra step to communicate with them every single day or every single week and meet them as often as you can. If you meet those 5 people, right, then a lot of your well-being journey is already in place. They'll do the job of making sure you're well, giving you the space to talk when you're unwell, making sure you smile, and all of these things. So that's what we need to do. Don't get distracted by the 150 acquaintances. They mean nothing, Start to double click on the people that matter in your life, and I think everything else will fall in place.
I love this. I feel like I can literally see everyone smiling in the room. But I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm going to make sure that I start at least at home by raising our floor. I feel like we've done a lot of work on that in the last 6 months, but connecting with the right people is definitely something that we're going to make sure we start with, and connecting inwards as well. For everyone else listening, I hope you enjoyed this and learned as much as I did, if not more. And I hope to see you with the next episode. Don't forget to hit subscribe.